Hi and welcome back to Cheeky Crypto. Today, guys, we're diving into the world of Multivac, specifically to talk about the recent price action of MTV. As we get into this video, if you find it useful and informative, do go ahead and hit that like button. I really do appreciate that. If you happen to be new to the channel, then why not go ahead and subscribe? Tap that bell, select all notifications, and in doing so, you'll always be kept up to date with all the recent MTV updates that we do here at Cheeky Crypto. Right, with that said, done out of the way, let's dive down into the charts here and take a look at what's been going on most recently with MTV and what we might expect to happen next here with Multivac. So what we're going to do is we're going to really focus in on our daily chart just here, okay? And ultimately, we've got a Fibonacci retracement tool, okay? This basically runs from the high area that was set back in April, okay, 14th of April, down to the low area that was basically achieved on the 19th of May. A very sharp kind of correction that we saw here. This was allowing us to basically find a nice buy zone. This is where we were accumulating a lot of MTV ahead of where we were going next, okay? So a fantastic opportunity to basically build a huge position in MTV ahead of this next push to the upside, okay? And obviously on this journey of this Fibonacci retracement tool, we're able to see some key areas. These are the 618, the 702, the 786, right? 1.2 cent, 1.3 cent, and 1.5 cent. Okay, and this is basically the yellow box area that you see over here on the chart. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail as we dive down into the deeper levels, right? But basically, we can see here that we, like in a similar way that we saw at the bottom of our chart, we were wicking into our 786 down to the 702, and in one occasion towards our 618. Okay, so this again presents us with an interesting opportunity to dollar cost average a good position ahead of that next step to the upside. Now, for Multivac, it gets super interesting when we actually start talking about the fact that we have over 3 billion staked, okay, out of a circulating supply that is only 3.59 billion. Okay, that basically means that, let's just round it up for argument's sake, there's only 560 million coins left in circulation, right? Now, that circulating supply could be that it sits on exchanges waiting to be bought, or it sits in people's wallets waiting to kind of for price kind of appreciation or long-term objectives. Might be actually on exchanges in people's wallets, not available for selling because it hasn't reached price targets, right? So what we don't know for certain is out of that remaining 560 billion coins is to whether or not, sorry, 560 million coins, I should say, and to know is whether or not what is available to actually purchase and what's not available to purchase. But what we do know is over 3 billion is delegated and staked, earning people a nice passive income. But above and beyond that, there's a huge squeeze on the supply. Okay, so with only 560 million left out there in circulating supply, it wouldn't take a lot of money to actually move that needle significantly to the upside. Okay, and specifically when we talk about market capitalization, which obviously is a very basic calculation that just calculates the very last sold price for MTV multiplied by the 3.59 billion circulating supply. Okay, so it's not a metric that can be used to understand whether or not a cryptocurrency has value, because it actually is only a metric to understand the current price. So it's important that we understand that Multivac has got a huge squeeze on the supply. And we'll talk about demand in a moment. And it's also important that we acknowledge that the market capitalization isn't a barrier to price discovery, okay? The market capitalization could quite easily represent, you know, a couple of billion, when actually it hasn't taken that much money to flow into the project to actually create that price appreciation, because it only really takes two things. The first, which obviously is the squeeze on the supply, which we already have through the delegation and staking process, and two, the demand for the actual token or coin itself. So for Multivac here, we already have the squeeze on the supply. All we now need is to have a demand come in that's big enough to actually push that needle significantly to the upside. Now, it could only take a few $1 million of money flowing into this project to actually push us up and above that 30, 40, maybe even 50 cent price level of this particular protocol and coin. Now, obviously, that market capitalization will be significantly higher than the money that's flown in, because it takes into consideration the last sold price and not the amount of money that's actually gone into the project in itself. A good example would be that I have been buying up millions of Multivac down here, right, when it was less than a cent, significantly less than half a cent. Not when it's been over 1 cent, okay? But the market capitalization would assume that my amount of purchasing would be at 1.6 cent, the current price, right? Obviously, that's not the case. My bag of Multivac was bought down here, not up here. And therefore, it's important that we understand that that market cap is only representing the now price, not the purchase price, okay? And therefore it doesn't represent the amount of money that's flowed into the project. It only represents the price of the project, not the value of the project. And therefore, if we want to understand the true value, we have to actually do external research outside of those basic calculations that are market capitalization and other things like that. Ultimately, we want to dig into the protocol. We need to understand exactly what's going on there with the technology. And we also need to go and understand what's going on with the team. We need to understand what the use case is, what is the utility of this protocol, and why would people want to adopt it in the future. Understanding these things help us understand whether or not we have value in the future for Multivac or whether we do not. And in my kind of opinion here, I guess, because it's not financial advice, is that Multivac is basically Ethereum 2.0, but you don't have to wait a couple of years to get it. So Multivac, in my opinion, is going to be pretty interesting. I think it's going to be a protocol that's going to grow rapidly. And obviously, if we start to actually see some marketing and some new exchange listings, like main exchanges like Binance, for example, or even Coinbase, we could see this price absolutely fly to the upside rapidly without too much money actually flowing into it. So everything's looking pretty good from that kind of perspective. Huge squeeze on the supply. Now we just need a demand, and everything should be looking pretty good for a good push to the upside overall. Now, obviously, when we talk about what's been going on most recently, we've actually been trading sideways, and we've actually been bouncing around on top of the 786. So before we get into the smaller time frame, I do think it's important that we actually jump over to the advice.io dashboard. On the advice.io dashboard, we can actually take a look at what's going on with the underlying value of Multivac. So for those who are unfamiliar, advice.io use artificial intelligence and machine learning to help us understand the underlying value of cryptocurrencies. There's a link in the description down below. It's completely free to use. Do sign up. You won't regret it, in my opinion. I think you're going to get a lot of value from this platform. With that being said, let's dive down into what's going on here with MTV. We can actually see that we've dropped down to a B2 rating, which is indicated by that down arrow as well. So again, this is something that we have to be aware of, that we could be expecting some volatility. As we come down into the charts here, we actually get a little bit more detail as to what is causing that downgrade. We have a rating of D for Fear and Greed Index. This is basically indicating that there's extreme fear in the market here for Multivac. Now, obviously, the generalized Fear and Greed Index that you see out there is just for Bitcoin. This Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index is actually looking pretty greedy, and it confuses a lot of people when they see their altcoins going down in value and Bitcoin going up in value as Bitcoin goes into a greedy status. Now, this is pretty much driven because money's actually rolling around the market. It's coming out of certain projects and flowing into Bitcoin, chasing green candles. People's frustration with some of these altcoins just trading sideways is potentially quite dangerous if you haven't got a good strategy and a good trading strategy around how you're doing this. Ultimately, at the moment, we're seeing a lot of volatility because we're seeing basically micro cap coins or even some pretty more robust historical platforms also having their liquidity affected by mass selling chasing these green candles as well. So right now we can see that the generalized or total market cap of all crypto is pretty much static. It's grown up a little bit, but ultimately money is just rolling around the market and it's all kind of flowing into Bitcoin right now. And this is again helping and aiding in Bitcoin dominance rising up. This is only a short term though, and in long term, we're actually going to start to see things balance out a bit. As Bitcoin starts to plateau a little, we should actually start to see that money rolled out of Bitcoin into other cryptocurrencies. And as a whole, we should start to see some news articles and some general kind of FOMO coming back into the market from retail investors that actually then start bringing fresh money in. And when that starts happening, this is where we actually start to see that narrative change. And we also start to see the Fear and Greed Index here for Multivac also change from a fearful area to potentially going up into a greedy one. This could happen overnight. It could be 24 hours. It could be 48 hours. It could be 1 week from now. It's really hard to get the timing right. But one thing that I'm going to say is that long-term investors, if they actually stick to their strategies, will usually end up better than if you were to chase those green candles. Ultimately, if you're investing and just throwing your money into projects that are already pumping, chances are that you'll actually get burnt long-term. So right now, it's important that we acknowledge that there is extreme fear for Multivac. That could lead into us actually seeing some volatility. Now, what's really interesting is when we go over to the Sharpe ratio. The Sharpe ratio is indicating to us an A2 rating. This basically is telling us that the rewards outweigh the risks when it comes to holding MTV. Therefore, you might want some exposure to MTV. And these two things side by side are interesting because obviously we have extreme fear, yet we're also being told that this artificial intelligence is indicating to us that we might want to hold MTV and actually buy MTV, right? So we have a general sentiment in the market here of basically people chasing the green candles and creating fear, which is unnecessary. And actually the artificial intelligence is saying that's pretty bad because you might want to hold it because long-term things are looking pretty good. So it's really interesting to see those two things side by side. The unreasonable amount of fear just rolling out chasing green candles versus the risk reward ratio where the rewards outweigh the risks. Okay, so exposure to MTV might be good. As we come on down, we can see an 𝗕𝗄𝗪 ratio. This is an A2 rating. An 𝗕𝗄𝗪 ratio is basically representing your liquidity. So with Multivac right now, unlike other projects like Cardano where there's huge liquidity based problems, Multivac has no problems with liquidity. That's actually a pretty good sign. That means KuCoin, Gate.io, decentralized exchanges are all looking pretty good from a liquidity point of view when it comes to Multivac and MTV. That basically means buying and selling MTV is actually relatively easy and shouldn't be a problem whatsoever. So that's good to see. Moving averages have been affected by the sideways trading and the small pullback that we've seen as well. So ultimately, this is an interesting one. Basically, those moving averages, I do feel that we are likely to start seeing those get corrected and pushed to the upside. In line with the liquidity, the fear and greed index and the Sharpe ratio, everything's not too bad for Multivac. It's just an unreasonable amount of fear in the space right now. The profitability is looking pretty good at the best rating that you can get with an A1, which you would expect during a bull market anyway. So overall, the only real issue is that people are chasing those green candles, in my opinion, and causing an unnecessary amount of fear for Multivac. Everything else from 𝗕𝗄𝗪 through to Sharpe ratio, moving averages, profitability, they're not too bad, and I think they're actually performing quite well under these circumstances. So as we come back to the Multivac chart and actually drop down into our into our hourly chart, we can actually start to see what's been going on. We basically had this downward trend. Okay, we pierced through this, pushing on up to new high areas of about 2 cents before pulling back down and losing the support level that we were trying to get at 1.7. This now triggered us going back into that 786 and also triggering into that buy the dip scenario just at the bottom here at 1.6 cents. Looking at the stochastic RSI, however, and obviously knowing that there's extreme fear in the space for Multivac, the expectation should be that we pull back down and potentially even touch on this lower level of 1.5 cents. Again, this is an area where we were able to buy up a pretty decent amount of that fear ahead of a good surge to the upside overall. So in my kind of opinion here, I think that the short-term view here, the next kind of 24 to 48 hours, will be a bit of a downward trend, where we look to come into about the 1.5 cent area and then bounce on out of there and try to take back that 1.8 cent zone before pushing up to 2.1. Overall, this is all small time things, and ultimately I do think that if we actually pay attention to what's going on the bigger time scale, such as the daily or the weekly, we actually get a good view of where things are going longer term. Again, we have 7.2 cent on the recent performance. We have 9.2 for the all-time high down to bear market low. And again, we have a 30 cent target or even a $1 target, based on whether or not we are likely to see a good surge with demand coming in the next few months, which potentially is on the cards with everything that is going on with Multivac in the background. So I do think that there's some good opportunities here for Multivac to buy up a little bit of fear as we enter into these lower bounds for potentially one last time. And then obviously talking about the market heating up in general, we see Bitcoin above 61K now and pushing up nicely towards its $67,000 target for the month of October, and everything's looking pretty good longer term as well. So I think Multivac has a good opportunity to at least take out that 10 cent zone. A good opportunity is presenting itself for a 30 cent move, and again, that dollar could happen if we get everything lined up perfectly with the exchanges such as Binance, Coinbase, and we start to see a lot more YouTubers, influencers, TikTok, Twitter, etc., actually talking about Multivac longer term, and obviously talking about the fantastic technology that they have there. Guys, if you find any of this useful and informative, hit that like button. I really do appreciate that. If you happen to be new to the channel, why not go ahead and subscribe, tap that bell, select all notifications, and in doing so, you will be kept up to date with absolutely everything that we do here at Cheeky Crypto. With this said, done, and out of the way, I hope everyone has a fantastic day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.